Hello, my name is Derek Main. Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to do another one of these videos here, and I think this is probably the new look and feel of the channel, so hopefully you enjoy it. But I really liked doing my last one, so I'm going to start doing these one take, no notes, just the tabs, sort of rantish things. And today I'm really going to talk about one book, but I'm going to use it as an opportunity to talk about reading, writing, book collecting, and the bookish life in general. And it's a great book to do it with. Fortunately, I don't have the cover, but it's Larry McMurtry, nonfiction, Walter Benjamin at the Dairy Queen. And it's his reflections on place, where he's from, reading, his life in reading, a little bit in writing as well. The two are hand in hand with him, as you'll see from some of the selections or parts that I read. And then book collecting and book selling. Now, I read this for the first time many, many years ago. I really like Larry McMurtry as a sort of literary character, if that makes sense. I'm not as... My wife loved Lonesome Dove. I never read that through that. I really do like his book about a young author called All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. And I would say that in my younger years, I probably read 5 or 6 of those shorter novels, some of the Dwayne series, Last Picture Show, of course. And they're really, really technically great fiction, and some of them soaring and awesome. And some are sort of forgettable. I can't remember much about The Desert Rose, for instance, even though I think that may be one of his personal favorites. Anyway, I really, though, do connect to his overall love of reading, book collecting, and whatnot, and especially in context of the place. So he's talking about this, sitting there reading Walter Benjamin in the Archer, Texas Dairy Queen, and I grew up in a more rural, I guess, environment. I don't want to make it sound, I don't want to oversell it, but Nanny and Papa's house, or Nanny and Papa's house, church on Sundays, Sunday school, sometimes church on Wednesdays, all the cousins and family all getting together, cattle farm of Papa's. Most of the family ended up kind of living on the same land and are all still there for the most part. Me leaving is a bit of it's an outlier. Well, from an early age, like a lot of people probably that are interested in watching something like this, I fell in love with reading. And I won't go through my entire history of this, but I do want to say briefly something about what I've come to learn here at age 41 was really part of that push towards it and part of my love, obsession, and addiction to literature, particularly fiction. I am the type of person who is sort of obsessively wants to experience as much as I can. I want to understand, I want to know, and in particular, I want to know what it's like to live another life. And I think one of the sort of really strange things to grapple with is this: we live once and we experience everything through one lens. And that makes it so narrow, right? Our experience, our sort of sensory experience is very narrow. And I have a curiosity about people's inner lives particularly, but also just the way that they experience the world. And I don't have a lot of money. I never have, right? And to be able to sort of like let go of my life and travel extensively. But I always found that I could bury myself in these books and go to entirely new places emotionally, spiritually, mentally, even physically, and go into someone else's head. There's a couple things I love about that, some of which you've probably heard me say before if you're regular on this channel. Part of my condition of depression, loneliness, and general ennui is that I do like to lose myself in other people's thoughts, sometimes my own, concerning and not positive, right? And so I find that in books. Because of the pace, and I'll talk about this a bit more in a second, pace and hectic nature of modern life and our collective attention deficit disorders, because of all of the things pinging us at once, I find great great deal of value in sustained focus for long periods of time, thinking seriously and intentionally on something. And this is another way that I sort of escape reality. And I do this through chess. The last couple of years, I got really into chess. I'm terrible at it still, not even 1,000 rated. But, in that moment when you're playing, you're really completely honed in if you want to be any good. Same thing with reading. And there's lots of other reasons, okay? But I really relate to being a bit of an outsider in terms of my love for this stuff and not having anyone to really connect with on this stuff. As many of you know, that's why I started the channel. As many of you know, when I did so much on international fiction, which I still read a ton of, but translated literature, it was that kind of travel through stories, travel through books that a lot of people share. And Larry McMurtry is someone who also grew up, although in a different time, because he's a much different generation than me, but he grew up in this more rural environment and found himself bitten by this bug. And I connect to a lot of the things that he talks about. So I got this book out again the other night, in the middle of the night, because I had been writing back and forth with a writer friend of mine. I've talked about his books on here before, Grant Meyerhofer. Buy all his books, read him, he's brilliant. And I was writing to him a little bit about this, and that night I couldn't sleep, so I picked it up because I had made some claims about the book, as I recall, and without having looked at it in several years. And I stayed up all night just reading it again, really. And this was about a week ago. I put tabs in it, and then today I pressed record, and I'm going to talk about it. So I'm just going to go in order of the tabs, read a little bit of what he says, give some reactions there, and hopefully through this, get at some things that I've been wanting to get at. So this is from page 103. I quickly began to need books as naturally as I need food. The minute I began to write, I felt a tension between reading and writing that, instead of abating, has grown more intense with the shortening of my life's horizon. I'm now in my 60s, which means that I'm looking at a maximum of about 30 more years of life. What should I do? Read or write? Though I have now read a lot of books, the range is still green with thousands of potentially interesting books yet unread. It's been with constant, if low-grade reluctance, that I've taken time off from reading in order to write fiction, screenplays, essays, and the like. So far, I've kept the two activities in uneasy balance, gotten away with doing both, but keeping that balance may not be possible much longer. I have, in any case, the feeling that I've already overgrazed the plains of fiction. The grasshoppers of times have stripped most of that foliage. Well, I really like that section because, as someone who also tries to write, not nearly as successfully as Larry McMurtry and on a number of different levels, but I sense, and I think a lot of people do that read and write, that same tension and that same struggle, how much to read, how much to write. Reading can be a very, I lost the word there, but a very luxurious activity. It can be a very sort of gluttonous activity. Like I really mean this quite seriously. Like, reading is, for me, it's just some of the most pure pleasure, I've ever experienced. Writing is nothing like that. Okay. And, certainly publishing is far from that, completely far from that. But writing serves a very different purpose in my life. Writing is a kind of adding your record, your name to a tally, and sort of building on this idea of the stories that we've been telling ourselves for as long as we've been around, and continuing on, and whatever. There all kinds of increasingly sort of bizarre mindsets that I get into when it comes to writing. But for reading, very different. And that struggle is real. And it's very interesting as he hits 60. So he's 20 years older here at this point. Obviously he's passed away now. And then he really sort of sees it as a real problem. Like, what is it between these two things? And obviously, as you can see from there, he prefers reading. Down here is something that I think about a lot, and I wish there was more of these. There's not much of a record in the memoirs of writers about the tension I have just described. I don't know if many writers feel it. I do know that some writers seem to resent reading, to resent literature even, as if it were unfair competition. Henry Miller has written a fine celebration of reading the books in my life, but in this, he is unusual. And, I want to finish this part actually because I liked this. On the rare occasions when I visit another writer's home, I almost immediately look at their books, which in too many cases consists mainly, if not exclusively, of books they've been sent to blurb or perhaps review. Well, I have Henry Miller's the books in my life, and I also really like it. And wish that more authors, in fact, did this. Mapped out their reading life, because there's an incredible amount that you can gain into the inside of a person from that. I talked last time a little bit about Cesar Arias, the literary conference, and in fact, that's one of the overarching sort of themes is like what you've taken in, is so singular and so unique, and it belongs kind of only to you. You're the only person that has that combination of artistic experiences, that then what you create is in itself singular, because only you have those particular combinations. So I wish more writers did have a log of their reading. We're going to talk a little bit about, there's like 3 sections in a row here that sort of a bit more on my little rant there about attention and whatnot, but it's sort of, I'm going to use it as an opportunity to espouse, perhaps now more than ever, the sanity of reading and how valuable it can be, like as personal growth development, like your brain, your spirituality, like true happiness. That took it a little far, but let's roll with it. Who is bored in Western society in quite that way today? It may be true that much of the society suffers from an essential boredom, but boredom is apt to lie deep in the psyche, well muffled by the buzz from the television set. Perhaps if the buzz could be silenced, people would still be willing to sit down and listen to a good story, but we'll never know, because the buzz is never likely to be silenced. There will always now be 24-hour news, 24-hour weather, and an endless ribbon of information feeding into our lives. Real curiosity now gets little chance to develop. It's smothered with information before it can draw a natural breath. I love that paragraph. I don't think obviously I couldn't have said any better, right? Or else I would have just said that. Let me add on it quickly. We're too quick in our decision making. We're too quick in our impulsivity. This comes in work, in life, in social decisions, all kinds of things, right? Because that information, which now here he's talking about 24-hour news and TV, like even that is antiquated now. There's layers and layers on top of that now to where it is nonstop. And as he says, the buzzing will not stop. So you are in control of stopping the buzzing for yourself or for your children, which we do here. And if that makes me fascist dad, well, that's fine. I don't care. I'm giving them the tools, right? And some of those tools are, can you pay attention? Can you analyze something? Or do you just impulsive react to these information nodes and buzzes that are constantly coming at you? It's a very important distinction. It's a very important difference. Many of the decisions in your day-to-day life are small decisions, right? They're decisions that you can almost run on default or on autopilot. But then there comes these times where you're going to have big, significant decisions. And if you approach those decisions with the same level of attention and the same level of analysis as you approach all those other decisions, because you've only got one mind, one mode, you've only got one default, you've only got one setting, you haven't trained your brain to concentrate, to hold a thought and a concept, to roll it around, to see all angles and sides of it, to sit with it, to sit with yourself in boredom. We used to sit in waiting rooms and there was just magazines there. That's it. There was no smartphone or anything there with you for you to just completely lose yourself into another world. No, you had to sit there with yourself. How often do you do that now? Well, I think it's an extremely valuable skill. And I think when you are making those very important decisions, when you have that ability to focus, to concentrate, it puts you so far ahead. Let's see where. I actually liked this, though, as a bit of a counterpoint on, he's not a Luddite or someone who goes into it and then says, well, everything is, all of this new information, whatever, is bad. Like, not at all. In fact, he says, my grandson knows every fact about this and that, and there's all at your fingertips, and it's wonderful, but it's about knowing where to put it in your life. Well, I liked this part because it gets at an earlier and simpler life, which he certainly knew something of. I doubt that this is a bad, I'll start with the last sentence so you can understand what Even the rancorous claims of family life can rarely distract them from their engagement with the media. I doubt that this is a bad thing. Family life, after all, has a way of dissolving into a number of often repeated set pieces. Also, I personally distrust nostalgia for times when supposedly life was simpler and less confusing. I lived through quite a few decades of those simpler times and remember them as containing less confusion but also less stimulation. It may be that thanks to TV and the internet, life is being lived more indirectly. Woody Allen did once refer to his own life as a distraction, but this may not be particularly bad. Perhaps email will resurrect the letter from the early grave that was dug for it by the telephone. Perhaps stories will find new routes to listeners, arrive in new forms. And, this is an older book, so we know kind of where that lies on that. Email did not do that because of what? Because of the deluge of distraction, particularly in advertisements. Because there are quadrillion-dollar companies whose only job is to get and keep your attention. Millions and billions of dollars go in to getting, attracting, and keeping your attention. But that's yours. It doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to Larry McMurtry. It doesn't belong to Google. It doesn't belong to YouTube. It doesn't belong to, I think Google and YouTube are the same thing. It doesn't belong to Twitter. It doesn't belong to either. It's yours. And whether there is or is not free will, certainly you can decide today, this is where I want my attention to go. And do the places that you want your attention to go, do they match up with how you want your life to be? Because what you pay attention to, what the inputs are in your life, those will reflect the outputs. What kind of person you will be and how you interact and engage with the world. But I like that he talked about it like there's no nostalgia here. Yes, it was simpler, but it was boring. So instead of taking this approach and saying, we'll get rid of it all. I hate it. Everything it's too much, too modern. No, where is this hybrid approach? We're in this era of hybridity, right? Where's this hybrid approach where it's like, we've got all these tools, but now I need to figure out where do I fit them in my life to have the life that I want to have? And those are questions we all have to ask and answer of ourselves, but we have to ask those questions. All right, this next section is about dinner. A ritual in our house that is extremely important, so I wanted to talk about that because, again, we're talking about modern life and the choices that we make. But dinner, called supper then, was a virtually inviolable ritual. Only natural disasters, severe weather, or some catastrophic breakdown in the day's work schedule could delay or abrogate family dinners at the kitchen table. In this, I don't believe we were exceptional. There were no fast food in the 40s and little in the 50s. The first drive-in, precursor of the Dairy Queen, appeared in Archer City while I was in high school. Working and middle-class families sat down at the dinner table every night. The shared meal was the touchstone of good manners. Indeed, their dinner table was the one time when we were all together every day. Parents, grandparents, children, siblings. Rudeness between siblings or failure to observe the etiquette of passing dishes to one another accompanied by please and thank you was the training ground of behavior, the place where manners began. Okay. I'm not going to rant on it too much, but take that time back. I grew up a little bit differently. I grew up as a TV dinner family, right? And I think a lot of people who were born in the early 80s certainly had that experience, okay? But now I feel a real resistance to that. We sit down and we have dinner, whether it's in the dining room, whether it's out back on the screened-in porch when the pollen's gone and we've got the nice weather, but we sit down and we talk about our day. Okay? And we fight and we argue and we do all the things families do, right? And I lose it. But we're there. We're present. We're here. It's the four of us. This is our world. This is our life. And we're going to choose to spend it not just in the company of each other, but with each other. I don't think I have much more to say about that because I think that I start to sound sort of conservative and weird and old-timey and hacky or whatever. But it means something. This is too disconnected. This is not it. We're too disassociated from the real. And things like supper can help bring you back. Certainly things like books can. Okay, I think I've got a couple more. Maybe even more than that. Who knows? Yeah, there's a bit about Susan Sontag in there that was pretty good. How much he valued her, loved her as a reader. But I'm not going to read that part because it's not terribly interesting. I think I only did it because I was like, oh wow, Susan Sontag. He's a big Susan Sontag fan. This is a bit about his obsessions in writing, and I liked this bit. Much of this book is dealing with one particular essay, The Storyteller by Benjamin. And McMurtry's doing the same thing I'm doing now, the same thing many people do, that are writers, readers, bookish, which is trying to place this kind of, this appeal to fiction within our lives and the purpose, whatnot. I suspect I responded so strongly to Benjamin's Storyteller essay because it dealt with a mode of discussion that I remembered well, the story orally passed on. Because of when and where I grew up, on the Great Plains, just as the herding tradition was beginning to lose its vitality, I have been interested in all my life in vanishing breeds. I'm going to skip ahead now to the next paragraph. As for the novel, the form to which I have devoted some 40 years of my life, it was first pronounced dead some 80 years before I was born. Even as I began my writing career, the death sentence was intoned regularly, many more times. In this case, it was a foolish death sentence. There was never any reason why the novel was likely to die, not unless the middle class, which brought it into being and still sustains it, dies first, and there's small likelihood of that happening. I don't want to delve into the class aspects of that last part because I'm unsure about whether I agree with that or not. But perhaps he would know better. But there was actually, I did an interview when Characters came out. I did a mutual interview with another author, Zach Smith, who had a book come out in Moo House. And we were sort of back and forth talking about each other's books. And we're two very different writers, right? And so that was kind of what was interesting about it. And I remember talking about the novel being dead, and he had said some comment about like, oh, I didn't, what makes you say that? Or I hadn't really heard that. And I wish at that time that I had this part flagged because, of course, it's a common refrain. And I found it interesting that even here, it already exists. And, of course, it existed for, I don't know when. I mean, I would love to know the first instance of the novel is dead, right? But they have been trying to kill it for a long time. But I love the idea of vanishing breeds. And in some ways, I feel like a vanishing breed in some of these rants that I'm talking about when it comes to attention, when it comes to dinner tables, and it comes to these things that Larry McMurtry, it comes to reading. I feel a bit like a vanishing breed. I think I'll end it, at least talking about this, with a look at his own work. He discusses his thoughts on his own work. When I consider my 20 and more books, I sometimes feel the same uneasy breeze that my father felt as he contemplated the 2 meager acres where his own life began and ended. My achievement may not be much different from his. It may consist mainly of the good name I bore and the gifted and responsible son I will pass it on to. I think 2 or 3 of my books are good, just as he thought 2 or 3 of the many horses that he owned were good. The rest of my writing may end up in that great city of dead words on the old fiction floor of acres of books in Cincinnati. I would have liked my fiction to have a little more poise, a little more tact, but those are qualities that seem to have found their way into my son's songs, and that is satisfaction enough. I really like that, thinking about his work there, and particularly in the context of family and his son. I hope to pass on to my children, both my son and my daughter, this love of storytelling and this love of travel through fiction, understanding the world and others through fiction, I still think it's the best mode. I still think it's the perfect technology. I'm still hopelessly, breathlessly obsessed and in love with literature. Take care of each other.